Good morning. We are here today to discuss Parshas Eikev. Title for today's shir is To Get the Job Done. I'll explain about that in a minute. Parshas Eikev, To Get the Job Done, this month, the month of Av, is sponsored by Chaimi and Donna Gutman in honor of the entire Zweig family and appreciation of their dedication to our local and national Jewish community and their dissemination of authentic Torah learning. As I've mentioned before, it's an honor to know Jaime and Donna, and such a pleasure. And we also all owe him a debt of gratitude for encouraging all of us to continue disseminating the Torah in many ways. This week's class is dedicated for Refu'ah Sh'leima, for Yehoshua Yisrael ben Sima, and all cholei Yisrael. So, just before we dive into the parsha, I just want to mention that this coming Wednesday, a week from today, I will not be able to do a Wednesday morning shiur. If I'm able to post something, I will, but I will not be able to do anything live for sure. So I just wanted to pass that along, and God willing, we'll, yes, be continuing the week after, but please stay tuned to your WhatsApp or private message me if you have any questions. So in order to fully absorb what's happening in these two parshios, let me just mention that the two paragraphs of Shema, which are so central to Judaism, Parshas Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and Parshas V'hayayim Shema Tishme'u Al Mitzvosai, those two parshios are contained in last week's Parsha Shema, and in this week's Parsha, Parshas Eikev, the second paragraph, which is V'hayayim Shema. So that's just to set up the drastic importance of these two parshios. In terms of understanding the context of the two parshios and that, we are going to do that momentarily. But first, let me just introduce questions that have been on my mind, and I'm sure on many of yours, such as, are we the Jewish people finished somehow in any way with the October 7th aftermath? Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, Gaza, global anti-Semitism, etc., etc.? Clearly not. Are we Americans in a stronger and safer America today than pre-President Trump? And I'm referring specifically to global terrorism and anti-Western movements, domestic security, economic growth indicators, etc., etc., etc. Obviously, those are very contentious and controversial subjects. And is our Jewish nation tracking upward and developing well, such as in the areas of Jewish population, Jewish identity and affiliation, Jewish nationalism in general, Jewish education, Jewish innovation and productivity, etc., etc.? I think that all of that is pretty hard to clearly assess. And so therefore, the overarching question is, what can we do to improve the answers to all of the above questions and considerations? So as far as the parsha goes, and we'll get now into the topic of getting the job done, so before we set up the context of both Parshios V'Eschanan in terms of understanding how the Torah places the Parsha of Shema, and separately in our Parsha, the Parsha of V'hayim Shema, let me mention to you a very interesting Rashi commentary on chapter 8, Pasuk 1, here in Parshas Eikev. The Pasuk says, the entire commandment that I am commanding you today to guard in order that you should live, increase, come, and inherit the land that Hashem has sworn to give your forefather. It's kind of a seemingly non sequitur sentence, and Rashi says, look, the simple explanation is that everything that follows is the entire commandment. And in this paragraph, you have recalling the 40 years in the desert, and knowing that God treats us like a son, and keeping the commandments and having awe for him. So that's the simple explanation of this idea of the entire commandment that I am commanding you today. But, says Rashi, a second explanation based on the Midrash Agada, which is actually quoted here in the Rashi, the idea is that if you start a mitzvah, then you should complete it. If you began a mitzvah, you should complete it. And Rashi cites a very interesting example. For example, we have the bones of Yosef. Only Moshe Rabbeinu paid attention to the bones of Yosef the night of leaving Egypt, as the Talmud elaborates. It was only him that was involved in making sure to transport out of Egypt Yosef's coffin containing his bones. but he did not get the opportunity to complete that mitzvah. What's the completion of that mitzvah? Bringing those bones into Eretz Yisrael and burying them there. And if we look, the way that the Navi in Sefer Yehoshua describes that the bones were brought up out of Egypt and buried in Israel, in Shechem, as we know, is that the Jewish people brought the bones out of Egypt and buried them in Shechem, even though we know it was Moshe Rabbeinu specifically as an individual who busied himself with this mitzvah of making sure to transport the bones of Yosef out of Egypt. So therefore, say the rabbis, that in order for a person to have a mitzvah credited to him, called by his name, is the language of the rabbis, the person must complete the mitzvah. Now, this is very interesting for so many reasons, but the idea is that Moshe Rabbeinu did not complete the mitzvah. Obviously, he wanted to go into Eretz Yisrael, and that's probably another thing he might have prayed for, was to be able to have the opportunity to complete the mitzvah. He was denied entry into Eretz Yisrael. He could not, therefore, complete the mitzvah of burying the coffin of Yosef with his bones. And therefore, says the sentence in Yehoshua, which is chapter 24, sentence 32, that the Jewish people brought up the bones from Egypt and buried it in Eretz Yisrael. And so therefore, Moshe is not called, it's not credited, so to speak, as having done this mitzvah because he did not complete it. And so says Rashi that here, the Torah is emphasizing the importance of the whole mitzvah, kol ha-mitzvah, the entire mitzvah that I'm commanding you to do today in order that you should live and increase and come and inherit Eretz Yisrael. It's as though the sentence is saying, in order to live and increase and come into Eretz Yisrael and inherit it, you must do a whole mitzvah. That's fascinating, that the setup of Parshas Eikev from that point in chapter 8 moving forward, and to remember everything in the desert, and to not forget everything that Hashem did for you, and to know that you're going to Eretz Yisrael, and you need to conquer these nations, and on, including Moshe Rabbeinu recounting some of the Sinai events and the golden calf, and so much comes from this idea that we have to observe the whole mitzvah. It means we have to take a mitzvah to its completion. We have to get the job done. And all of that is part of the context of the second paragraph of Shema, which says, and it will be, if you surely listen to my commandments, that I'm commanding you today, to love Hashem, etc., etc. So all of this is part of the setup of understanding the second paragraph of Shema, which leads to the rest of the setup of last week, Parshas Shema, and this week, Parshas V'haya. So what I'd like to do is just share with you briefly the outline of the Parshios, starting with V'eschanan. And in last week's Parsha, of course, the Torah told us that Moshe Rabbeinu was denied entry into Eretz Yisrael, and then he basically admonishes the people to be very careful, to remember everything that they saw at Har Sinai, and that if, God forbid, they become old in the land, complacent in the land, and they start immediately destroying and doing idolatry. So the most horrific of destructions are going to happen, which we read on Tisha B'Av, and then from wherever we are scattered across the world, we'll somehow come to seeking Hashem and getting to know of his existence. We talked about this last week, and we talked about this both on Wednesday and on Friday. And then the Torah goes on to describe the setting up of the cities of refuge and recounting the 10 commandments. That's all part of Parshas V'eschanan, and all of that leads into the fact that the Jewish people requested from Hashem after Mount Sinai that they should not themselves directly be in communication with Hashem. Instead, they should ask Moshe to talk to Hashem and relay the teachings and the messages to them. And Hashem acceded to their request. Hashem said, no problem, do as that which they said. And then the Torah goes into the fact that keeping all these mitzvos and listening to Hashem is good for the Jewish people. Hashem wants that. And by the way, so we'll go more into that in a minute. And then the Torah mentions the paragraph of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and it goes on to warn the people not to test Hashem and to conquer Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so that's Parshas V'eschanan. Parshas Eikev then opens with the idea that we need to follow the commandments and Hashem will bless us from all of the nations in the world. Hashem will remove all diseases from us, and we will be able to overcome our enemies. But if God forbid, we say, how can we conquer these big enemies that are in the land of Israel? Don't worry, Hashem is going to be fighting for you. Hashem is going to send the wasps in front of you in order to destroy them. Hashem is going to remove the enemies, but just be very careful to completely vanquish them and get rid of all of their idolatry, and do not bring anything abominable into your houses, to, God forbid, not be like them. And then the Torah says that sentence, the whole mitzvah, which we learned is either all the commandments that follow or getting the job done. We need to complete a mitzvah. All of that is a long paragraph, again, reminding the people that they should be careful to remember everything that they experienced. And now, listen, you're crossing over the Jordan. And don't think, says the Torah, that it's because of our righteousness that we're entitled to entering the land. No, it's not because of your righteousness. It's not because you're so straight-hearted that you're coming to inherit these nations. Rather, it's because of their wickedness, meaning the wickedness of the present occupiers of the land, and because of the promises that Hashem made to Abraham, Yitzchak, and to Yaakov. And you should know it is not because of your righteousness. And in fact, from the day that I met you, you are rebellious against Hashem. When I went up to the mountain, you did this devastating thing called the golden calf. And I went down and I saw everything that you did, and I prayed for you, and I was very frightened of the anger that Hashem had against you, and Hashem was also angry at Aharon, wanting to destroy him. And this sin that you did, I was able to somewhat, rectify. I took that golden calf, I burned it in fire, I ground it into a fine dust, I threw the dust into the river, and then in other places you also angered Hashem, in Taveira and in Massa and in Kivros Hatava. All these are places where the Jewish people sinned. You were angering Hashem. And then when it came time to send the spies, you also rebelled against Hashem and you didn't listen to him. Again, this is where the sentence appears. You have been rebellious with Hashem from the day that I know you, and I fell and I davened to Hashem by the golden calf. And I said, don't destroy your nation, your inheritance, that you redeemed from Egypt with a strong hand, right? Remember Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and don't let the Goyim say, God just hated us, took us out, and killed them in the desert, because they are your nation and your inheritance that you took out. Then he recalls again that he made an ark in order to situate the tablets. And so what does Hashem want from you, says Moshe Rabbeinu? Hashem wants that you should have awe from him, to go in his ways, to love him, and to serve him. Sounds like Moshe Rabbeinu is saying it's not such a big deal, even though we understand that that's itself a difficult concept. And then he again repeats that the land that you're getting to inherit is a great land. It's not like Egypt, that you need to, water it yourselves. The rain comes from heaven, and Hashem is always looking at this land. Then the Haya in Shamoa Tishmeu, and it will be if you listen to my commandments. So just as a simple setup, we see that Parshas Va'eschanan sets up the first paragraph of Shema by admonishing the people to remember Mount Sinai and being very careful to not forget it, and that, God forbid, great destruction can happen. And then follows the Shema, that if the great destruction happens, and we will seek Hashem eventually, then comes the first paragraph, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And the second parsha talks about all the commandments that we need to keep, either all of them or completing the job, and remembering the way that we angered Hashem so many times, and that we are going to conquer Eretz Yisrael, and we need to be careful to completely destroy all the enemies. And what does Hashem want from you anyway? Just to serve him, etc., etc. And the land of Israel is so good. And if you listen to the commandments, then you'll get the rain in its time, and I'll give you the herbage, and you will gather your grain, etc. So we're going to go into that in a moment. But what is this progression, and how to understand that so many paragraphs seem partially repetitive? What exactly is the difference between what's happening in V'eschanan with the setup of the Shema, and what's happening in Eikev with the setup of the Haya im Shamoa? Now, what's very important is to know of a famous Talmudic argument between the sages and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And this is based on a sentence in our parsha where it says, and you will gather your grain. So let me just read to you the sentence, and then I'll tell you what the Talmud says. This is tractate Barachos 35b. It will be if you surely listen to my commandments that I am commanding you today to love Hashem your God and to serve him with all your heart and all your soul, and I will give you the rain in your land in its time, the early rain and the later rains, and you will gather your grain and your wine and your oil. So say the rabbis, what does it mean you should gather your grain? Now, there's another sentence, and this is actually from Sefer Yehoshua, that the Torah should not depart from your mouths, and you shall contemplate in it day and night. So say the rabbis, I might have said that we literally need to spend our entire days and our entire nights immersed exclusively in Torah study. But the Torah also says, gather your grain, your wine, and your oil. So apparently, the Torah is indeed saying to act the way the world acts, assume the way of the world, set aside time not only for Torah, but also for work. And that is the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael. Comes along Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and says, is it possible that a person, and I see we have our dear friend Mordechai Astley, I think, on our call today, is it possible, Reb Mordechai, for a person to plow in the plowing season, to sow in the sowing season, which means to plant, to harvest in the harvest season, and thresh in the threshing season, and winnow in the windy season, right, as grain is separated from the chaff, and this person is constantly busy? Is it possible to do all that? What will become of the Torah? Rather, one must dedicate himself exclusively to Torah at the expense of all other endeavors. And when the Jewish people perform the will of God, their work, meaning their plowing and their harvesting and their winnowing, etc., will be performed by others. The Jews themselves will not need to do all that work. Other people will do it. God will orchestrate it that other people will do all of our work for us. And he brings a sentence to that effect from Yeshaya: strangers will stand and feed your flocks, and foreigners will be your plowmen and your vine dressers. That's Yeshaya 61, sentence 5. But when the Jewish people do not perform the will of Hashem, then they will need to do their work. And not only that, it could even be that they will need to do their enemies' work. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says a very drastic black and white statement. Only spend your time immersed in Torah study, and then that is considered the will of Hashem. And if not, then you will need to do your work, and possibly, God forbid, even your enemy's work. And the Gemara concludes with the following statement, that the sages, which is really Rabbi Yishmael's opinion, Rabbi Yishmael, who says, no, set aside time also for work in addition to Torah study, says Abaye, summing up this dispute, although there is, this difference of opinion, many have acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael and combined working for a living with learning Torah, and they were successful. And many did in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and were not successful. So many dedicated themselves only to Torah study and they were not successful. And that is how the Gemara concludes. Now that itself, I think we can all agree, is a fascinating argument, definitely one that's relevant and important to know. And it does seem like the Gemara is concluding, right? It seems like the concluding summation of Abaye, who's a later halachic authority, is militating in favor of working for a living combined with Torah study. Okay, that's beautiful and interesting and relevant. But here's a fascinating question. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the famously known author of the Zohar, we are commemorating his yahrzeit every year with Lag BaOmer. He's one of the 5 surviving students of the great Rabbi Akiva. Right? We know of his incredible reputation and his brilliance, and he's advocating exclusively for the immersion in Torah study. Okay, that's really cool, interesting, important, hard to understand, but yes, that's what he says. But the problem is that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says that our paragraph in Shema, which says, and you will gather your grain, your wine, and your oil, is talking about when the Jews are not doing the will of Hashem because they are not exclusively immersed in Torah study. And that's why they themselves are going to need to gather their wine, their oil, and their grain. That's what he says. Okay, but how could that possibly be? That very paragraph, which is in our parsha, Parshas Eikev, says, and I will give you your rain in its time, and you will gather your grain, your wine, and your oil. Why is the rain coming from Hashem in your time if you're not doing the will of Hashem? Why will you have grain? Why will you have wine and oil? Why are you getting those blessings, but you're not doing the will of Hashem? But even stronger than that is that the very first sentence of the Haya, upon which this sentence is built, that you will gather your grain, your wine, and oil, is, and it will be, the Haya, and it will be, Im Shema Tishmeu, if you will surely listen, El Mitzvosai, to my commandments, that I am commanding you today, Le'ahavas Hashem Elokechem, to love Hashem your God. Ul avdo, and to serve him. B'chol livavchem, v'chol nafshechem, with all your heart and all your soul. You know what will happen? I'll give you the rain in your land in its time, the early rains and the later rains, and you will gather your grain, your wine, and your oil. How can Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai say and posit that this is talking about when the Jews are not doing the will of Hashem because they are not exclusively immersed in Torah study? How could this not be the will of Hashem? To love Hashem with all your heart and to serve him with all your heart and all your soul. How is that not the will of Hashem? So these are very big problems in understanding the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So let's just go through a couple of questions, then we'll dive into, hopefully, an explanation. The question that we just asked, which is, how could Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai state that the blessings of the Haya are talking about when the Jews are not doing the will of Hashem? Also, as we mentioned Rashi earlier, that talks about how the whole Parshas Eikev is kind of built on this idea of make sure to complete a mitzvah. Why is that such a big emphasis at this juncture in the Torah, at this point in the storyline in Moshe Rabbeinu's last month when he's talking to the Jewish people about entering the land? Make sure to finish the whole mitzvah. That's what this whole setup in Eikev seems to be very much based on. Those are two questions, and now two more Shema questions. You know, when you look at the entirety of the Torah, we could point to many important paragraphs in the Torah. We have the Ten Commandments. We have the Bereshis narrative. We have the covenant with Abraham with circumcision. We have the Ten Commandments. There's so many things that we could say, you know what? This deserves repeating twice a day. This is something which we absolutely must have on our minds so much. Now, the first subject in the entire oral law is saying the Shema at night, and then followed by saying the Shema in the morning. That's the first subject in the Talmud in Tractate Brachos, which is the opening volume of the Talmud. So that itself tells you that there's something incredibly foundational about the Shema, because that's where it begins, even though in the Torah, that commandment does not come up until here in Deuteronomy. So we have the entire 4 books before here, 4 volumes, and now the Torah talks about the Shema and the V'haya. Okay, but somehow the rabbis know this is really, really important. And it's so foundational that we put these paragraphs, Shema and V'haya, in our mezuzahs, in our tefillin, right? We recite it on our beds before going to sleep. We also know that this is a way to stave off the evil inclination, is to recite the Shema. And we even have this major custom among the Jewish people that if, God forbid, a person is facing imminent death, say the Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. These are the words that departed from the lips of the martyr Rabbi Akiva as his flesh was being combed with iron combs. So obviously this is so important, but it's tucked away here, Parshas V'eschanan, the second paragraph in Parshas V'haya. When we look at the sentences in the Torah, how do we know that this is so critical and foundational? That's one question on the Shema. And then the second question, a question that one of the yeshiva bachrim asked me just actually 2 days ago, which has been bothering me for years and years, and Rashi does talk about it, but it needs further explanation, is that we read the Shema that when you lie down and when you get up, these words should be said. And the way that the rabbis explain that is that it's not when you personally go to bed. It's not when you personally arise. It's when people normally go to bed and when people normally get up. How do the rabbis know that the Torah doesn't mean to say specifically whenever you go to sleep, such as midnight, or whenever you wake up, such as midday, if that were to happen? So say the Shema. How do the rabbis know that it's not talking about you, the individual? It's talking about the collective people whenever they go to sleep, whenever they wake up, and it's also written in a singular fashion. And this, by the way, is Rashi's question, and it's just a really hard answer to understand. Rashi says, well, the Torah also says when you go on the road and when you sit in your house. So the Torah is just talking about like normal human behavior. It's not talking about you as an individual, what you do. It's talking about like when you do things that people do at times that people do them. That's the way Rashi seems to answer the question. It needs a lot of explanation. I don't want to go too detailed into that because we have also so much to do, but I do think that's a very interesting question, and we will try to address it. So what I would like to begin with in terms of setting up an answer is that let's just break down the simple way to look at Parshas Va'aschanan and the first paragraph Shema, and in contrast, Parshas Eikev and the setup of Parshas V'hayim Shema Tishmeu. Right? Because it's a given that these paragraphs are so critically important to Judaism. So here's what I suggest. The first paragraph, Shema, from the context in the Torah, and I'll explain how in a minute, is that the first paragraph is the Torah's way of teaching us the right way to maintain the identity of Jew that we acquired at Har Sinai, which then will lead to properly entering and properly conquering and properly inheriting and thriving in Eretz Yisrael. That is the first paragraph. The first paragraph is Moshe Rabbeinu's way of saying, look, I begged Hashem to enter Eretz Yisrael and I was denied. And I was denied because of you. Because you did not want that relationship. We spoke about this on Friday. I urge you all to listen to that shiur. But basically, we did not do everything correctly. And because of that, I'm denied entry, and you're not going to Eretz Yisrael the best way either. And moreover, if you don't recall everything of Sinai, what I'm referring to today as the identity that we acquired as Hashem's chosen nation, a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy people that is meant to serve as Hashem's ambassador to the world and to palpably make the presence of Hashem felt in the world. If we don't live that way, then we are in danger of getting into Eretz Yisrael and losing it very quickly. That is what we read about on the Tisha B'Av. And the Torah continues from there that, yeah, God willing, from exile, we'll seek Hashem, and we'll get back there, etc. But just understand, keep the 10 commandments in your mind. When you go into Eretz Yisrael and you set up these cities of refuge and you're conquering the land, keep the events of Sinai, the 10 commandments, firmly implanted in your mind. And remember that you wanted an arm's length relationship with Hashem. You chose that Moshe should speak on your behalf to Hashem and not you directly. Remember all of that. And you know what? Hashem is okay with that because Hashem just wants what's good for you and what you're going to do that you're capable to do. But if you really want to do it the right way, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Know that the entire universe is intricately intertwined with the existence of Hashem. Absorb that concept. Understand that the oneness of Hashem requires a relationship with him and that he loves you. And you should love him naturally because of that. Naturally. Why did he create you? He didn't need to create you. He's unique. He's all powerful. He doesn't need anything. Why did he create you? Because he loves you. And you should love him with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And make sure that these words are firmly implanted on your hearts by sharpening these words to your children, making sure that they're fully integrated into who your children are, and they're fully integrated into every aspect of your life, no matter what you do, no matter when you go to sleep and when you get up, no matter where you are sitting at home, going on the road, and put them as signs on your body, on your arms, and on your head, and write them on the doorposts of your house. Why? Because that's going to be the truest way to integrate fully into your beingness the identity that you acquired at Mount Sinai. And if you do that, then you don't only survive in Eretz Yisrael, you thrive in Eretz Yisrael. And then the Torah goes on in our parsha to tell us that at the very minimum, you have to make sure to keep the commandments fully, even if you don't have that full appreciation of the identity acquired at Sinai, even if you don't fully, naturally have this yearning, burning to connect to Hashem as the Shema Yisrael would teach us. And even if you're afraid to enter Eretz Yisrael at the lower level, don't worry. As long as you're fully committed to the commandments, you will overcome your enemies and you will be there. And even if you still harbor your somewhat rebellious nature, because you are Hashem's people and Hashem is choosing you with all of your failings. But in order to maintain your ability to stay in Eretz Yisrael, you must fully commit to the commandments. And this is what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is saying. It's a very simple point. People, if you ask your spouse or your parents, anybody who loves you, if you ask them and you say to them, look, I don't really feel the love for you, but I'm working on it. Is that what they want? They might appreciate that, but is that really what they want? Or do they want that the same love that they feel for you naturally, that they have for you because of their connectedness to you, their oneness with you, their appreciation of who you are, the awareness of the way that you feel, that they feel intrinsically connected to you, which just yields a tremendous inspiration of love. They want that the other person should feel that way as well. So says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it's true that the first sentence in the Haya says, if you will listen to my commandments that I'm commanding you today, to love Hashem your God and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, that's good, but it's not really what Hashem wants. Does Hashem want that we should love him as a commandment? If you listen carefully what the sentence says, if you will listen carefully to my commandments that I'm commanding you to love. The first paragraph of Shema doesn't say that it's a commandment that you're going to then love Hashem because it's a commandment. It says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Understand the full importance and the unbelievable concept that Hashem is one, that everything is connected to him, and you will naturally love Hashem, your God. Remember, we don't even have the Baruch Shem in the Torah, right? We go straight from Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, have done, you will love him. That's the will of Hashem. That's what it means, what Hashem wants, as per Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And so therefore, this second paragraph of Shema, which is talking about maintaining Eretz Yisrael and not yet having the full absorption of the lessons of the first paragraph of Shema, that's okay. And it's good. And you will get your rain in its time. And you will gather your grain and your wine and your oil. That's all good. But it's also precarious. And it's also not the ideal of what Hashem really wants. And therefore, you will need to do your own work, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You're not living at the optimal, thriving level. And despite the fact that many Jews tried to live that way, where they only studied and did not work, it didn't work for most people. That's what the Talmud says. That doesn't work for most people because they're not on the level of that. And moreover, the rest of the people are not on the level of that. And we know Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself and his son, that they were so fully immersed in the Torah learning that they did for 13 years, and they came out. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's son looked at people and, it seems like somehow damaged them in some severe way, and they had to go back into the cave. They weren't ready for the world. They were living on a different level, a different plane of existence than the rest of the world was capable of living. Is that what Hashem ideally wants? No, Hashem wants the ideal, the full, unbelievably inspired love for him, where it's natural to love him and natural to absorb the Torah into our essence, into everything that we do. That's the first paragraph of Shema. That's what Hashem really would love and really wants. But Hashem is okay with this Parshas V'hayim Shema Tishmeu. No question. Hashem is fine with that. And you will get your grain, your wine, your oil. Everything could be great. Not in the ultimate ideal, but still everything can be great. But notice that the second paragraph very clearly says, but be very careful, because if your heart strays at all, then you're going to worship idols, and God will get angry, and you will be exiled from the land. And just always bear that can happen swiftly. That can happen quickly, and therefore you better put these things onto your heart and to your soul and tie them onto your hands and put them as a sign between your eyes and teach them to your children, because the bottom line is that in the first paragraph, you don't have to be worried that you're going to lose it, because you're coming to this with such a tremendous, natural, inspired love of Hashem. But in the second paragraph, where it's more effort, so to speak, and it's more of a learning process rather than a natural thing that is being evoked from your understanding of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, that's why these two paragraphs of Shema are so different. And so therefore, how can we make sure that we do maintain our possession of Eretz Yisrael? And dare I say, even today, that very same question. How can we make sure? How can we make sure? For sure, it would be great if we could all get onto the level of the first paragraph of Shema, to love Hashem fully, to be fully inspired with this tremendous thirst and yearning for a relationship with Hashem, which is great. And to the extent that any of us ever experience it, we know how beautiful and how motivational it is. But we're not always on that level. So what can we do to maintain? How do we make sure that at the very minimum we're in a process of coming to love Hashem? And that at a very minimum we will be blessed with maintaining Eretz Yisrael and your grain and your wine and your oil, which, by the way, is undoubtedly being received today by our nation in Eretz Yisrael, right? Just think of the thirst happening in Iran and the bounty happening in Eretz Yisrael. The shekel has become so strong with all the war that has been raging for 2 years, with all the trauma that our nation has been suffering. Jewish people have water and food, and they are unbelievably strong compared to so many of their enemies around them. So that's great, but how do we make sure to keep it? So says Rashi that the setup for that is that we cannot lose sight of the end goal. See, every mitzvah has two major components. One is that we need to get involved in whatever Hashem tells us to do. That's a mitzvah, and we have to do what we can to perform the mitzvah. That's one. And for many of us, it's a way either of checking a box or feeling good about ourselves that we're involved in doing what Hashem wants us to do. But the second component, and a super critical component of every mitzvah, is that there's a purpose to the mitzvah. And in order for God's purpose and his plan for creation to happen, the job must get done. The full performance of the goal of the mitzvah needs to be in our minds. And it's great to be in a stronger position than in Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas, and none of us would have imagined that we could be sitting here today in that position. But are we getting the job done? Are we committed to not only existentially surviving, but to actually being able to live in the land of Eretz Yisrael without all that fear, so that we can function as the nation of Hashem and fulfill all the long-term purposes that Hashem has mandated for us in creation? It's not enough to be less afraid. It's not enough to hope that we've pushed off a nuclear threat from Iran for 2 years or 6 months or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. No, we have to get to security so that we can live our mission. And here's where we're failing. Most Jewish people do not know their mission. That's a failure. And the first paragraph of Shema is the ultimate version of that mission. And the second paragraph of Shema is a secondary version of that mission, which God willing will lead to the first paragraph of Shema. But we need to know that there's an ultimate purpose, and every mitzvah has an ultimate purpose. And when the Torah records who did the mitzvah, it's talking about who did get the job done. And in the case of Moshe Rabbeinu taking out the coffin and bones of Yosef from Egypt, he did not get the job done. The Jewish people finished it. So collectively, the Jewish people did that mission first with Moshe Rabbeinu doing his part, and then the rest of the nation finishing that mission. That's great. That was an end to that mitzvah. Yosef needs to be buried in Eretz Yisrael. He's part of our very critical identity as a people, and he needed to be there. That's great. But Moshe did not get it done. And every mitzvah has the second component, not only to try to do what Hashem wants and to be involved in doing what Hashem wants, but to have the eye on the ball that the mission needs to happen. Now, if we Jewish people want to live the reality mandate of the first paragraph of Shema and the second paragraph of Shema, for sure we need to be reciting it twice a day. And for sure we need to be keeping in mind what all the Jewish people are doing. So therefore, when you wake up and when you go to sleep, doesn't talk about you as an individual. It's talking about, listen, the words of the Torah, the words of the Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, the words of Ahaya Im Shemoat Yishmeu, all need to be bared in mind. Not only that we do this as a Jewish people, as an individual, but as a Jewish nation. That we're talking to ourselves, not only about, hey, do I believe in Hashem? Am I seeking a relationship in Hashem? But are the Jewish people seeking a relationship with Hashem? Are the Jewish people seeking to fulfill the mission that Hashem gave to us as a nation? And absorbing that identity that we acquired at Har Sinai, with the mission of making the palpable presence of Hashem felt in the world. Are we absorbing that as a nation? It's not only about you as an individual. So listen, Jewish people. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Listen, absorb that. Fall in love with him and naturally love him and become so inspired to be absorbed by the words of the Torah that that's all you do, which is what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says. And just remember that no matter what you need to do in your life and where you need to go and where you're sitting, or if you're on the road, it's not only about you, it's about what's happening with the entire people of the world, because otherwise there's no way to make the palpable presence of Hashem felt by the entire world. And so therefore the rabbis know that the first paragraph of Shema is so foundational, the second paragraph of Shema is so foundational. Why? Because this is the way to properly I enter Eretz Yisrael. This is the way to properly fulfill the identity and mission that we acquired at Har Sinai. And that there's two levels, right? There's one where we're totally falling in love with Hashem, or there's a second where we're committed to doing all the commandments. We're committed even to completing all the commandments. And that's great also, even if it's not as ideal as the first paragraph of Shema, but that is the essence of the Jewish future. The essence of the Jewish future is making sure that the missions are completed. And we are not going to have conviction of this identity and this mission in the next generation if we are not thinking collectively as a Jewish people about how to make sure to maintain the Jewish education, the Jewish identity, and the Jewish affiliation, about how to maintain the security of Eretz Yisrael, which is also dependent on having enough Jewish people who care about it, who are going to fight for it. I was just with my brother's brother-in-law, my brother Yitzchak's brother-in-law, who has been working in the IDF for 50 years. And we were talking about the trauma of the soldiers, and he's at a retreat with some of them. And he said, still today, after many, many months of not being on the battlefield, there are people that he's with that if they hear a soda can pop or a bottle open, they dive for cover. That's the PTSD. They're afraid of the loud noise. It just makes them dive for cover, right? This is part of the trauma that our nation is undergoing. And do you think the next generation of Jews are going to want to experience that? That they're going to have the strength of conviction to want to fight for our nation the way that these soldiers and our nation has been fighting for now almost 2 years? It's not going to happen unless we are firmly embedding into our hearts and into our souls and into our minds the mission and the identity of the people, the love that we should be feeling for Hashem, or at the very least, the commitment to completing the mission that we were given at Har Sinai. And so that is really how the rabbis know the foundational importance of the Shema, both the first paragraph and the second paragraph. It's no coincidence that we say it twice a day. We say it before we go to sleep. We put it into the tefillin. We put it into the mezuzahs. We say it before, God forbid, an imminent death. We understand how important Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad is. We need to make sure that the next generation and the following future Jewish people understand how important it is. And how do the rabbis know from the verses of Shema that when you lie down and when you get up refers not to you specifically, but when people wake up and when people lie down? And by the way, it does refer also specifically to the Jewish people, which is why we have 3 hours in the morning, because the Jewish people are considered to be the children of Hashem. It's because if we are not living this mission and this identity of love for Hashem as a nation, and if we're not concerned about what's happening with all the people, then we're not doing the job, and we're not living the mission, and we're not truly interested in what Hashem wants. We're just thinking about me. And so therefore, the rabbis understand that this is a general statement when you Jewish people wake up and when you Jewish people go to sleep, because obviously it's not dependent on one individual and what they do with their lives. It's dependent on, as a nation, are we absorbing the Shema and the Vahaya messages, which we need to say in the morning and in the evening when we wake up and we go to sleep. And of course, this is all part of integrating into our natural lives, and the ebb and flow of life is waking up and going to sleep. So the bottom line is we have to remember that at the very least, we have to keep our eye on the goal, right? That's what Parshas Eikev is coming to tell us, to keep our eye on completing the mission. Every mitzvah needs to be taken to its conclusion. It's not enough to do some and to contribute. No, we need to take the end goal result, that the mitzvah gets completed, as absolutely critical, because that's what it means to understand that we are fulfilling the mission and the identity that Hashem bequeathed and gave to us and really instilled within us at Har Sinai. And all of this, of course, concludes that if we do this, we will increase our days and our children's days on the land that Hashem swore to our fathers to give to us, which is what we're all hoping for today. And I'll just point out that that very last sentence in the Shema, which says in the Vahaya paragraph in our parsha, that in order to increase your days and days of your children on the land that Hashem swore to your fathers to give, it says to give to them, because that's a guarantee for resurrection, that it's not only the land that Hashem gave to us, but that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are coming back. Rashi brings that also. The Talmud says this. This is a hint to resurrection in the Torah. So even if we don't live on the level of the first paragraph of Shema, but we do live on the second level, which is utter commitment to making sure to learn to love Hashem and to make sure that we complete the commandments and to understand that, okay, fine, so we do need to go to work. We're not on the level of working and of immersing ourselves in Torah all the time. That's okay. Okay, it's not the ideal. That's okay. And that can even bring us to the resurrection as long as we're fully committed and we're very careful, God forbid, to not stray from that mission. Let's take questions and comments, because it's already a little bit on the later side, and we'll see. Maybe we'll continue with some more of this on Friday as well. Any questions or comments? In the meantime, let me check with my mother that my father is doing the class. The answer is yes. Great. So please remember to zoom on over to my father's class. Anybody with a comment or a question? Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing everyone, God willing, in 2 weeks. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the class, I will not be doing this live next week. I wish everyone a great week and the rest of your summer in the meantime.